Welcome to the September 2025 FO exclusive. Last month, we covered Donald Trump's assault on the federal government, dramatically deteriorating US economic governance, and the story of Alaska and Washington, D.C. summits. So those of you who want to watch all of these three segments, you can go on YouTube. You can access our analysis there. This month, Carle and Glenn is a retired CIA officer, my partner in crime, a senior partner at FOI. This month, Glenn and I have been struggling to decide what to cover. A lot has happened this month. US President Donald Trump has addressed the United Nations, where the escalator stopped and the teleprompter did not work. He told us very kindly so. He claimed credit for ending 7 wars, called climate change a con job, and blamed the UN for not helping or even calling him, leave aside achieving its potential. Now, the American president is damning climate change at a time when the Arctic sea route is starting to take off. As those of you who watch us and read the news know, the Houthis have choked traffic through the Suez Canal and the Bab el-Mandeb, that sea route that comes down from the Suez, goes through the Red Sea, and then that strait, Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and then on to India and beyond is, shall we say, hazardous. So many ships go around the Cape of Good Hope and Cape Agulhas, the southern tips of Africa. In 2024, 92 ships traveled the northern sea route, which hugs the Russian Arctic coast. In 2016, only 16 made this voyage. Or, sorry, I apologize. In 2016, only 19 made this voyage. So clearly the numbers are rising. They're not quite fivefold, but they're certainly getting there. Most of the ships taking this route are carrying Russian commodity exports, such as natural gas, which in any case is often extracted close to the Arctic coast. However, and this is pertinent, container ships or container shipping is also beginning to take off. So a journey from Ningbo in China to Felixstowe in the UK takes 18 days, less than half the time required to sail around Africa. The Northern Sea Route that British explorers dreamt about, and the Polar Silk Road that the Chinese currently dream about, is coming ever closer to reality. Now, speaking of China, China hosted a Victory Day parade to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the end of the Sino-Japanese War, which basically is regarded in Chinese eyes as the real end to World War II. And Xi Jinping, or Chinese President Xi Jinping, had 2 glamorous guests. One of them was Russian President Vladimir Putin. The other was North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. Immediately prior to the parade, which was very impressive, those of you who have time should watch it. It was apparently more impressive than most other parades, especially the parade Donald Trump organized. Anyway, before this parade, Xi hosted a summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi held Vladimir Putin by the hand and walked over to Xi. Talk about love. One hopes it's brotherly. Anyway, the photos of Xi, Putin, and Modi triggered quite a few headlines around the world, and commentary as well. Glenn's piece on SCO, the acronym for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, is on Fair Observer, and you should go ahead and read it. Trump and Health Secretary Robert Kennedy, going back to the US, linked Tylenol vaccines and autism. The Trump administration has announced a wide-ranging effort to study the causes of complex brain disorder. So I know what I can blame my brain fog and my lack of intelligence and even less ability on. It is Tylenol, ladies and gentlemen. We now know the answer. The Trump administration has also made the H-1B visa regime a lot tougher. Now, companies will have to pay $100,000 per year for such visa applications, even after the six-figure fee. There's no guarantee that the visa application will go through. It very well might be denied, and you may be $100,000 poorer, or the company may be $100,000 poorer. Currently, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services issues 85,000 H-1B visas per year. So the H-1B visa program, which benefited Indians more than anyone else, is now gone as we know it. We predicted there would be a tightening of immigration as early as April 2024, and what we predicted at FOI is coming to be true. Now, when it comes to drama, there's of course drama nonstop happening in Europe, and we'll get into that in detail. But drama pertaining to Russia is quite interesting. Russian drones entered Polish and Romanian airspace. Russian MiG-31 fighter jets flew over Estonia for 12 minutes before NATO's Italian F-35 jets intercepted them. Oslo and Copenhagen airports closed for several hours because of drone sightings. Apparently, the drones swish their lights on and off. And when all of this is going on, gold prices rose above $3,500 a troy ounce for the first time. Google survived the biggest antitrust case since the iconic Microsoft case of the early 2000s. NVIDIA has invested big time in OpenAI. We could go on, but we'll stop because this is not a rundown of all the headlines. This is fundamentally an analysis of what we think are the most important issues of the month. And the three most important issues we chose for September 2025 are the divided, not United States of America. That's number one. Number two, dollar will continue to plummet. Dollar will continue to lose value. Number three, economic pain and political turmoil around the world. So let's crack on. The divided, not United States of America. Over to you, Glenn.
Well, silence is probably the wisest course of action here, given all of the wonderful events that you touched upon. But I think it's, I want to start talking by mentioning one of the great works of literature, certainly of the last 100 years. I think it's one of the great books ever written. I'm not the only one who thinks this. And then I'm not just talking about literature. I'm mentioning this specific book because of what it tells us about what's happening in the United States. The book is by Milan Kundera, The Unbearable Lightness of Being.
It's one of my favorite novels. It's extraordinary. It's a work of genius.
It portrays life in Prague and in then Czechoslovakia in the aftermath of the 1968 Prague Spring, that was crushed by the Soviet tanks and Soviet army, and overthrew the nascent democratic, pluralistic leader Alexander Dubček. I was a boy at the time, but here in the United States, in Boston. But I vividly remember there's a footbridge, not only a footbridge, but there's a bridge over a small river, a small stream in my town that was spray painted, and this was in the decades prior to the explosion of disgusting graffiti that's now become pervasive everywhere on buildings and trains and so on. But it was sprayed "Viva Dubček," and of course that didn't help him a whole lot. But Kundera wrote a book that describes life in a socialist, Warsaw Pact, Soviet Empire society. And the reason it's relevant is how does one react to a world uh, that in which truth is lost or cannot be identified because facts are controlled or denied, and where one citizen, an individual, loses agency, loses the ability to affect much beyond his or her reach. The reaction described was that people turn inward and away from the broader social world. They focus on gardening or on music or on sex. And they become nihilistic and passive, many. Now, there will be revolutionaries and opponents who say, no, I won't accept this. But on the whole, when people lose agency politically and socially, that is the reaction described in by Kundera, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. I went to Prague a few years after he wrote the book, still a good number of years before the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War. And so I saw that society. And it was exactly as Kundera relates in his book. So why is this relevant now for what I'm going to talk about, the divided, not United States of America? I have sensed for some time a similar shifting in people's attitudes and behavior. There is a strong segment of American society that ardently supports Donald Trump and the Republican Party, but there's a much larger percentage of the American society that opposes what's happening and is appalled. But they have no real power on a national level. At the local level, still there is some, although the effects are felt even at the level of a small town, such as the one I live in. That's a secondary point. And so what do people do? They turn into their family life, into the vegetable garden that I'm very proud of that I have. And it's because the government, all branches of government, all the levers of power are controlled by a party that aggressively has shaped truth to be whatever it says that it is. Think of the speech that we'll hear about from Atul in a few minutes that Donald Trump made at the United Nations, in which he derided, denigrated, dismissed global warming as something even real. And so there's a loss of mobilization and a disaffection, which has profound sociological, cultural, and political consequences. Sorry, Atul.
Can we very quickly say something about Charlie Kirk, a celebrity?
I'm getting to that. This is just the foundation, of course. I'm sorry.
Exactly, who was assassinated.
So with that as a background, specifically what's happened, as all of you will know, is that this commentator, activist, young man, political figure named Charlie Kirk was assassinated while giving a talk at a university in Utah. And the reaction has been quite astounding nationally. He has been quickly turned by the Trump administration and by the Republican Party and the whole political movement into a martyr, a nearly Christ-like figure. In fact, the explicitly religious comparisons and comparisons to Christ have been repeated, numerous. So there was a ceremony, a commemoration of his life, I guess you would say, that the president attended. It lasted for 5 hours. There were over 100,000 people. The religious, not just undertones and overtones, the religious shaping and presentation of the entire event and of the meaning of his martyrdom were quite explicit and powerful.
It was
And how
both
does that play out in society?
If I may say, it was both religious revival and political rally. I mentioned before we went on air that the service reminded me of televangelists I have seen out of curiosity over the years. It had very much that feel of a religious spectacle. And Erica Kirk, the widow, Charlie Kirk's widow, forgave the man accused of murdering her husband. Donald Trump consoled her publicly. The 100,000 people were almost in a state of religious frenzy. Meghan McCain said today is the day Democrats lost 2028. There was both a sense of mourning, but a sense of foreboding and a predictive element to it, that this is the way the world will transpire. So I was quite fascinated. I mean, you haven't suffered the same as I have on YouTube, because I watched the ceremony and I watched Trump's entire speech at the UN, Glenn. So I'll leave you to carry on with the analysis, because I am drowned in the facts.
That could explain your tremors and your stutter. Who knows? The vice president, in 2 days after this man Charlie Kirk was assassinated, hosted Charlie Kirk's replaced Charlie Kirk in Kirk's own program on television and the radio, and he did so directly
YouTube
from the
as
White
well.
House.
That goes over all media.
Yeah. So in the days that followed, a prominent television comedian and talk show host named Jimmy Kimmel said, essentially, while giving his ostensibly humorous monologue, he said, as though the Republicans and supporters of Charlie Kirk were not exploiting his death to justify their positions, so something to that effect. He had also said that he decried the assassination and felt great compassion and sympathy for his family, that survived him. Kimmel was immediately fired, suspended from his program for having incited violence and outrageously somehow sullied the image and reputation of this now saintly figure. He's since been brought back last night, after a week off, I guess it was. But it has caused a political firestorm. His really slightly tasteless, but not really critical incendiary comment, which was taken as just that, incendiary and unacceptable, so that that speech should be taken off the air. And even now, there are dozens of television stations controlled by conservative owned companies that refuse to put Kimmel on the air because he has been such a blasphemer of the holy memory of this figure. Now, relevant to this is, Atul teased me about having watched it all, but the country is so divided now that when Kirk was assassinated, I spoke with a couple of people who I know they would be called the political left. I would simply say that they are not they are not supporters of Donald Trump. To me, the two are not identical, but that's not a point acceptable, distinction acceptable from the far right's perspective. And their reaction to me was, well, who was Charlie Kirk? They had never heard of this fellow who was followed devoutly, in a carefully chosen word, by dozens of millions of people who have this.
Especially young people. His unique genius lay in firing up a lot of young people, particularly on campuses. And it speaks to two things, Glenn. It speaks, one, to the fact that he was such a savior-like figure for these young people, but it also speaks to the fact that such young people were so alienated at these campuses that they flocked to someone like Charlie Kirk. And he wasn't a terribly good debater. I saw him a few of his debates, especially the one at the Oxford Union and the Cambridge Union. And I was thinking, yeah, I mean, he could have made those arguments a lot sharper. But the fact that he became such a fantastically revered figure amongst the young also shows how the young must be so dissatisfied, or many of them, at the universities. And a lot of the young speak about universities being places where they can't speak freely, where you have some kind of politically correct Soviet style oppressive omerta about stuff you can't say without being accused of being not true enough to the Bolshevik cause. And you said it ages ago that Bolshevism now lives on most actively in U.S. university campuses. And
its last refuge is in American academia.
Exactly. And as someone English, or rather British, said that all bad ideas come from France, but American universities make them a lot worse.
So why is this fellow Kirk, his assassination, has it caused this quasi-religious phenomenon in response led by the president, the current president of the United States? And what does it have to say about society? And first, to Atul's point, the issue of free speech and what is acceptable discourse in American society has become a mortal threat, a lethal one, a mortal threat to an individual who transgresses the line, in whatever direction, and a mortal threat to the continuation of an effective democratic society and government in the United States. Atul touched upon the counterpoint to Charlie Kirk's phenomenon, which is the woke phenomenon, and Kirk and the right are reacting against the woke phenomenon a lot. And it has become truly fraught to express an opinion that can in any way be construed as characterizing or qualifying any race, religion, color, creed, gender, or politically acceptable perspective. That sounds like I'm speaking from the right, but it is real enough that all one need feel in the current context is that something that a person said hurts one's feelings. It made me feel ill at ease. I was not happy by what I heard. I am not exaggerating. And that person
Glenn,
can then be charged.
You and I have been accused of being Islamophobes because we expressed reservations about radical, fundamentalist, or extremist Islam. And some of the podcasts we've done have touched upon these issues and said there is a problem with when you view truth with a capital T and you have a universalist idea which doesn't differentiate between church and state. And it was actually some young undergrads, one or two from your own university, who have declared the two of us to be fuddy-duddies, old fogies who are prejudiced.
Might be true.
And Islamophobic, amongst other things.
Yeah. This is the dilemma that the foundation of free speech is to protect speech that one does not like, to protect speech that one hates. And the line drawn in America successfully until now has been that so long as speech does not incite to imminent violence. I forget the name of the case, Supreme Court case that decided that. It was 1998 or so, but it's been a long process. So long as speech does not incite to imminent violence, then it is protected, to the point where even Nazis were protected by the government so that they could march through an Orthodox Jewish community called Skokie, Illinois, 35 years ago. But that has all changed now. And a statement that is viewed as offensive to me will be unacceptable and prosecutable. and will destroy careers. So Kirk was reacting against that, but also a phenomenon from his side of the political spectrum enforcing that kind of view. And so the society has become so fractured that people who are engaged in politics, whom I know, had never heard of Kirk, and others are presenting him as a saintly figure who was sent by God to save America from the left-wing totalitarians. So, how is this possible? Well, first, his death, which and any murder and any death is a tragic event, and certainly a murder and assassination are. But it was immediately within hours, if not minutes, seized upon by the White House and everyone below as a way to demonize the radical left and to blame them for the fractures of society. That's unprecedented, just about, by a president who at least has attempted to give lip service to the need to represent all of society and all its factions. But that's not the case now. And so in so doing, that also creates further division and opposition. So this has been a catastrophic event. How is it possible that a figure who opposes individual rights, who thinks the state should define one's sexuality, who would deny agency to females and thinks that females are inferior and should stay home because they essentially exist to produce children only. How is it possible that someone like this become the champion of the now ruling elements of American society and the government? And how can evangelical Christians in particular, who give the foundational support to the Trump phenomenon and the far right, how can they support this? And I think that there are probably 5 elements or so that for evangelical Christians, sin is considered unavoidable and it can be forgiven. So it's not disqualifying for a leader. So you can get a pass. You can do bad things. Oh, you shouldn't have done that, but you're still my person. So it's not like a Calvinist view where you're either good or you are bad, and you are accepted or you are damned. It's it's okay so long as he supports things that I want to achieve. There's also the goal is that they have felt disempowered for ever, and that Trump and the MAGA phenomenon can give them power to not only express, but to impose these views. There's a tribal loyalty that doesn't matter what the truth is, so long as my leader says it, and that's the views of my tribe, and that's also the case. And they view that society has been moving against them for many years, and that this is an existential threat that they can parry by unifying behind a leader. And that's the definition of fascism. And I'll get to 2 points. What is the meaning of this ceremony or commemoration and the assassination, the reaction to the assassination? And I'll read again. What is the definition of fascism? It is a populist political philosophy, movement or regime that exalts the nation and often race above the individual, that's associated with centralizing autocratic government, headed by a single dictatorial leader, and characterized by economic, social regimentation, by forcible suppression of opposition, and I would add views and speech. And then finally, the fellow I like to talk about, but no one else has ever heard of, Carl Schmitt, Adolf Hitler's and the Nazi regime's lawyer, said the concept of the state presupposes the concept of the political, and the political is defined by defining who is a friend and who is an enemy. Thus, within 2 hours, the demonization of anyone who did not view Kirk as an exalted figure. And then finally, another major fascist leader said the press must not be allowed to confuse the people and mislead them with false reports or the truth. and that was Joseph Goebbels, who was Nazi Minister of Propaganda. So all of this is just, this being the Kirk assassination and the reaction, I think are dramatic examples and parts of the phenomenon of the existentially dangerous split of American society. And it is easy to destroy a system. It is very difficult to reconstitute it. And not for the first time, I said, and I'm hardly the only one to fear, that this is a worse crisis than any confronted by the United States in its history, and that there is a real question as to whether the democracy that people assumed and idealized can actually be restored in the United States.
All right, we move on to point 2. Dollar will continue to lose value. Now, those of you who've been following currency prices, those of you who've been following gold, silver, platinum, and palladium prices, as one of our partners at FOI, Manu Sharma, does. Manu Sharma is an economist. He's also a pollster, a psephologist, and he is a numbers man. And we've been looking at numbers together, and it seems very clearly that a combination of trade and monetary policies coupled with a government debt crisis will keep pushing the US dollar down. The Trump administration's faith in the US dollar's unassailability is not supported by real world data. And this is adding to concern over the dollar's safe haven status. Now, let's talk about what people in the US Treasury are saying, obviously off the record. No one dares to speak on the record, even in normal times, as Glenn Carle will tell you. He served in the CIA. And during these times, people certainly don't say things on the record. And they are saying that the political leadership is no longer serious about tackling constantly mounting debt. They say that the US will eventually be unable to service government debt in its current form or structure. The Republicans just want to give away tax breaks. The Democrats just want to keep spending. The Republicans also spend, to be fair. They want to spend more, perhaps on different stuff, more aircraft carriers, I suppose. And the Democrats probably want...
If I just, for one second, respected economists from as far right as you wish to go to as far left as you wish to go, all concur in this point, that the American political system has been unable, is showing no willingness to, and has proven itself incapable, of addressing
and the latest
problem,
budget.
But that it is actually, once again, an existential issue, not today, but becoming an existential issue for the global economy, the U.S. economy, and U.S. political system and society.
Yes, indeed. And we expect further downward pressure on the US dollar because existing holders of dollars and treasury bills may start switching to alternative currencies to avoid exchange rate losses. And the most worrying thing is that policymakers do not appear to be concerned. And this holds true for Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. This holds true for, obviously, US President Donald Trump. This holds true for Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. This holds true also on the other side for the new bright shining hope of the Democratic Party, Zohran Mamdani, who in all probability will be the mayor of New York. And his focus is on distribution of resources, redistribution of resources, better social services, all of which may be very laudable. But the reality is that there is a ticking time bomb of deficits and debts but no one seems to be really bothered in the political world. Now, interestingly, if we take a step back and we look at things a little more conceptually, many US policymakers appear to believe in the dollar milkshake theory. Now, what is this dollar milkshake theory? The theory is that a strong dollar, the straw, sucks up liquidity from the global markets, the milkshake, into dollar-denominated debt and assets. So why is the US dollar strong? Well, according to this theory, not because of markets, not because of superiority of technology or confidence in future growth, but because of expansionary monetary policy distortions. Because the US can provide cheap credit, because its market interventions have created a global economic order in which capital is allocated not on the basis of productivity, innovation, or comparative advantage, but instead on the relative ease of financial arbitrage because of the financialization, the excessive financialization of the global economy. At least that's my point of view, the excessive bit. Because of that, no currency, the Swiss franc may have a higher value than, or may appreciate compared relative to the US dollar, but it does not have the liquidity. Gold may appreciate. Actually, it's crossed, as you just heard earlier, or some of you heard earlier, the $3,500 per troy ounce mark. It still doesn't have the liquidity. You can't carry bags of gold to exchange assets. And so the only true safe currency in the world is the dollar. And ironically, greater geopolitical turbulence is likely to lead to a greater demand for dollars. And you can take the example of the plummeting of the Indian rupee as an example that, look, there is geopolitical turmoil in South Asia or the Indian subcontinent, and people are buying dollars and dumping rupees. However, that theory ignores something very pertinent, the real world. The dollar has actually been depreciating against almost all other major currencies. And we have a very nice graph, which you can look at it later. We will share it with you, or you can look at it now. It's part of our geopolitical risk monitor. And since January 2nd, 2025 to 12 September 2025, the dollar has slipped from 109.39 to 97.61, against a basket of major currencies. Now, the dollar has depreciated even more. It's gone from 0.376 during the same time period to 0.270 against gold. So the reality is that the dollar is not doing as well as the theory claims, and perhaps like the heliocentric theory of the universe that held sway for a while until Galileo appeared, or Copernicus appeared, and a whole bunch of other people followed. That too was once debunked, and so might this theory too. The other thing which has been an unintended consequences of the Joe Biden administration's actions against Russia is that the freezing of Russian assets has made other countries nervous. So in 2022, of course, Russia invaded Ukraine. The war still continues. The US and allies prevented Russia from accessing about $300 billion of sovereign Russian financial assets held in Western financial institutions. The interest, and income of these assets is partially diverted to Ukraine. Now, this has made countries like China, this has made countries like India, this has made countries even like Brazil, because you see the tiff between Brazil and the US right now. Lula is not exactly very fond of Donald Trump. Ignacio Lula, if I remember Lula da Silva, sorry, if I remember his name correctly. And his full name is quite a long one. And Lula's predecessor, Jair Bolsonaro, has gone to jail. A court sentenced him to jail. And Donald Trump has come out on the side of Jair. And so if you are Brazil, will you have faith in keeping money in dollars? The answer is, well, the precedent has already been set under the previous presidency. This presidency is far more autocratic and reactive. So you say, okay, maybe, just maybe, we will diversify. So in addition, apart from all this financial sanctions bit, in addition, the US has imposed tariffs even on its closest trading partners and allies. And this has really shaken confidence in US assets, even in places like the UK, which has just hosted Donald Trump. In fact, one of the things we forgot to mention in our roundup is Donald Trump went to the UK and had a lovely banquet with Prince Charles. Now even US allies are a little wary of US assets, and central banks are now turning to non-US assets, especially gold and even silver. Now, Deutsche Bank has reported that hedged instruments into the US bonds and equities are outstripping unhedged holdings for the first time in 4 years. At the start of 2025, only 20% of foreign domiciled US equity exchange traded funds were hedged. Over the last 3 months, 80% of the $7 billion invested has been hedged. So our sources in New York, in London, in Dubai, in Singapore, and in Frankfurt agree that the hedge dollar moment has arrived. Now, there's one more thing which we covered last time, which was the Trump administration's pressure on institutions, and especially the Fed. I'll hand it over to you, Glenn. Just 1 minute. I'll wrap this up.
Sure.
As we've talked in the past, US President Donald Trump and US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent have been putting pressure on the Fed to cut rates. They appointed key advisor Stephen Mirren to the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors before the interest rates policy meeting. Note, he was the only dissenting member who wanted an even higher interest rate cut. And so this pressure on the Fed to cut interest rates makes people believe, makes foreigners believe that the administration's maneuvers will succeed, this will fuel inflation, and this will devalue or depreciate the dollar even further. Over to you, Glenn.
Yeah, I think I'll be a little reductionist here. And you've presented elements, anyway, of what I would say, I think I can fairly say is the outsider, the non-American's perspective or interpretation, an attempt to understand what the heck the United States government is doing economically. And I can provide, not just by who I am, but intentionally also, so the insiders. And we don't need to have an assumption that's implicit in the milkshake dollar theory of malign, diabolical plotting by devious, secret American, politicians. Classic economic, not theory, classic economics explains what's happening compellingly, I would argue, which is that the utter incompetence of the Trump administration explains the decline of the dollar since he's back in office. Has fallen, I thought it was 7% since in the last 6 months. Your figures indicate it's been more over a longer period of time. It doesn't matter. The trend is down and will continue. And we don't need this milkshake theory. It's certain that America benefits in ways that are unique, not necessarily fair, and partially intentionally designed by having the dollar and the Bretton Woods system, to the extent it's created the world that we live in economically, continue to have the dollar with advantages from a cost of investment perspective for the United States and so on and so forth. However,
and the UK once had this advantage. The pound was the reserve currency of the world. The UK actually physically ruled a third of the globe.
But none of that would be possible were the structure and the foundations of the economy to which the currency is based or represents were not the strongest. And the reason the dollar has been strong, the American economy has been strong, is because total factor of productivity of the United States remains substantially greater, even after the chaos that Trump has introduced, substantially greater than any country on earth. Any country.
Indeed.
The growth rate has been
Europe
larger.
Actually has fallen
Capital
behind.
is larger.
Europe actually has fallen behind in the last 20 years.
Yeah, absolutely. The percentage of the world's gross national product is larger. The most important market in the world remains the United States. The number of patents obtained or applied for, of inventions, the amount of money in absolute terms for research into by all of these measures of the foundations of economic strength, the United States, despite all of the chaos recently and trends, remains by far first in almost every index. Why has the dollar been declining? It's been declining because Donald Trump is attacking the independence of the Federal Reserve, which sets interest rates, which determine the strength of the dollar. Because he's raised tariffs, taxes. At the same time, he has increased spending and reduced revenues, which will cause inflation, weaken the dollar progressively, and that simply is an economic fact. There's no plot involved whatsoever. Every step that the administration has taken, I think almost literally every step, has eroded or challenged or undermined, whatever word you want to use, one or another of the pillars that lead to economic strength and therefore a currency's strength. And those things are only now beginning to take effect. Those things being the policies that the Trump administration is putting in place only now are taking effect. Just the one little point that we can all be ironic and derisive about, Trump's statement at the United Nations that global warming is a big hoax and everybody's a fool except for him and the world. That alone is so delusional, so destructive to reality that it will undermine the economic strength, the coherency of the American government, therefore economic strength of the American economy, and the strength of the dollar relative to others. And China is a very competent, very powerful, very large, growing economy. And the percentage of international transactions organically, because of the rise of China's economic strength, and intentionally because of policy measures taken by the Chinese in particular, but Europeans too, and other countries too, is slowly, not decisively, but slowly changing the percentage of global trade and currency exchanges done in denominations other than the dollar, which also will weaken the strength of the dollar. So where to place the blame is pretty clear. And we don't need an explanation of some sort of a devious theoretical construct. And the dollar will continue to weaken. Inflation will continue to rise in an accumulating rate for the foreseeable future. And that is long-term, contributing also to economic and political stress in the United States and undermining America's centrality.
On to number 3, economic pain and political turmoil around the world. So if you are American and you were thinking that America was the only place in the world that was divided, America was the only place in the world with economic pain, well, we have good news or bad news, depending on whether you have Schadenfreude or whether you have empathy and compassion for everyone.
This, by the way, is the Russian peasant's interpretation of how to live in society and get on the world, which is if you see your neighbor doing well, you don't think, oh, gee, I should do what he does too. No, you say, I have to pull him down to my level. So that will create further distortion.
The joke is, the peasant, God appears before the peasant, and the peasant, and God says, whatever I will give you, I'll give you double. I'll give the double to your neighbor. And the peasant thinks for a minute and says, take one of my eyes. So,
Okay, there we are.
If you believe in that Russian peasant worldview, then the good news is that major
That's right.
economies around the world are facing turmoil, and they've had decades of slow growth. In fact, the Japanese prime minister went, or rather, he's resigned. There'll be a leadership contest. The French prime minister resigned, or I think had to go after losing a vote.
Vote of no confidence. Yeah,
exactly, vote of no confidence. The UK had 150,000 people show up in London protesting under Tommy Robinson. Obviously, they were unhappy about immigration. To those of you who are not British and not English, note that Tommy Robinson is a convicted felon, and he spent time in prison, and he is far to the right of Nigel Farage. So clearly, a lot of people find him as a beacon of their hopes.
A man of conviction.
Come again?
He's a man of conviction.
A real conviction. So what is going on? Why is there so much turmoil? Let's begin with in the rich part of the world, in the first world. We'll get to Indonesia, Nepal, and India very shortly. Let's start with economics. And we have a graph, and you can look at that graph, and that graph shows that the UK had 0.6% growth for the last 20 years. This is less than 1% growth. France and Japan had 0.7% growth over the last 20 years. Again, less than 1% growth. So, number one, growth has been extremely low. And number two, the distribution of the gains of this low growth have been highly skewed. So in reality, a lot of people have seen their quality of life, their standard of living go down. There is a real, this is per capita, sorry. I stand corrected. Managing editor, managing partner of FOI made this correction. This is per capita. I stand corrected. All right. I spoke in aggregate. It is per capita. So a lot of people have seen their standard of living go down. And revolutions depend on the price of bread. This is something Glenn and I have said over the years. Or if you're in East Asia, on the price of rice. And in Japan, there has been a cost of living crisis. Inflation hit 3.2% in January, and actually, the price of Japanese grown rice doubled this year. A minister had to resign for making a joke about rice. The LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party, the natural ruling party of Japan, it failed to win a majority in the lower house of parliament in October 2024. In July, they fell short of a majority in the upper house as well. No wonder Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba resigned. Of course, US tariffs on Japan didn't help. And he resigned at a time when tariffs, tensions in the Asia-Pacific, and so many other challenges to Japanese politics remain. Japan will have its fourth prime minister in 5 years. Now, we have friends in Japan, not just in Tokyo, but in other cities. And they tell us that even Japan, which is socially cohesive, which has not had high immigration, even their internal fragmentation and political instability, of course, this is relative by Japanese standards, worry them. Now, talking about internal fragmentation and political instability, let's look at France. And Peter Isaacson has analyzed the issue. You can read his piece. He has analyzed how and explained how France is in perpetual crisis. the parliament has voted out a second government in 9 months. So, of course, those of you who remember, there was Michel Barnier. He negotiated with post-Brexit UK. He was a very talented bureaucrat, but in the French system, President Emmanuel Macron is almost like an emperor. He can choose prime ministers at will, and then they have to win the confidence vote in parliament. And Barnier, of course, couldn't win that confidence of the parliament. Francois Bayrou followed Barnier, and he went and he made a speech about France living beyond its means. And now Macron has installed loyalist Sébastien Lecornu as France's 5th prime minister since 2022. And the two of them enjoy scotch together in the Élysée Palace. They are very close political operatives. And French legislators could not and still cannot agree as to how to curb the mounting deficit. They disagree over spending cuts and tax increases. It's not just the US that is politically paralyzed. And we can see that the Fifth Republic has 5.8% budget deficit. It is the highest in Eurozone. Its debt GDP ratio has reached 114%. And now there is talk of a Greece-style debt crisis. Bayrou himself has warned of it. There is fear that the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, may have to step in to save France. And as economic pain increases, nationwide protests have erupted. The French, in a very French way, are taking to the streets. We've already mentioned the UK. In the UK, the great financial crisis of 2007, 2008 was followed by the COVID pandemic. And of course, it was sandwiched by Brexit, both these events. You got a hat trick: the great financial crisis, Brexit, COVID pandemic. And the UK is doing worse than France and Japan. And immigration is a huge issue, especially of the illegal variety, coming through small boats, crossing the English Channel. And so you have in the first world this crisis of low per capita growth, extremely unequal distribution of income as well as wealth. And naturally, people who are facing declining standards are taken to the streets. Glenn, any thoughts there before we move on to the poorer part of the world?
Well, I don't know if we're getting pressed for time, so I'll try to be very quick. I have an overlapping, but I think a different interpretation of the central drivers of what's happening. And I think we should all think about 1848, when the world exploded in a series of revolutions at the same time. And why did that happen? Well, it happened because there was a global weather phenomenon that caused several years of terrible agricultural harvests, which put tremendous strain on the overwhelmingly dominant sector of all societies, which was agriculture, the farmers, the peasants, the rural parts of society, at a time simultaneously of the rise conceptually, a cultural shift of nationalism as opposed to passivity with regard to who one's ruler was and a sense of individual national identity. Similarly, today, I think we're living in another global phenomenon. And it's not a matter of stresses, dissatisfaction, and instability caused by the lack or the slow rate of growth, although everyone would like a happier rate of growth, but some ways being victimized by one's own success and their responses to change. And I would say that it boils down to, you could say, race and religion. However, let's put that as the loss of in-group, traditionally in-group dominant in-group control of a society, or challenge to that in-group control, and that's largely perceived by people through race and ethnicity. The white guy in America is no longer cock of the walk and gets pissed off about it. Same thing in Holland, same thing everywhere. Immigration is the way we perceive this in contemporary society. Then it's the rate of change, social change. All change, even good change, is destabilizing and makes one feel confused and insecure and afraid. And therefore, the rise of a traditionalist movement, which is, oh my God, everything is going wrong because no one's going to church anymore, or we're driving cars instead of having horses as we should. Choose the change. Change presents opportunity. Change is always stressful. The greatest risk of revolution doesn't come from peasants who are oppressed. It comes from rising expectations and possibilities. The French Revolution, it came because the French state was sclerotic in many ways, but it was progressively dynamic and changing economically and socially. Similar phenomena are happening with all societies as the modern world destroys everything and all authority figures. And then you've touched upon several of these points. Finally, the concentration of wealth. Since 1980 in the United States, roughly the same period globally, the post-war consensus that you have to have a regulated market economy, which redistributes wealth to some extent to the less privileged 80% of the population, has been progressively undone by the Reagan Revolution in the United States, the conservative ascendancy, the Trump phenomenon, which is even much further to the right than that. And that means that rather than lack of growth, it's lack of opportunity and material possession, actually. It's 40% or some such thing of all wealth in the United States is possessed by 1% of the population. And the bottom 80% has something like 10% of the national wealth. And at some point, that leads to the similar phenomenon that we saw in ancient Rome, which is the collapse of the Republic because of social unrest from below. And that's what we're experiencing progressively across the developed world.
Now, that is not a phenomenon just limited to the developed world. What has happened is that a cost of living crisis has hit the entire world. Asset prices have risen, rent has risen, the costs of childcare, the costs of education, the cost of healthcare have risen. And if we look at Nepal, where a communist government was in power, and Nepal used to be a monarchy until recently, and that monarchy went because that monarchy was seen as unequal, that monarchy was seen as extravagant, and that monarchy was seen as incompetent. And it had been in power for a while, for a few centuries. And yet it went spectacularly. A succession of governments followed. And what brought down the government in Nepal was the fact that, well, on the one hand, the country is quite poor, but on the other hand, the Nepo kids whose photos flashed on social media, they were flaunting their European jaunts or Mercedes cars or their fantastically privileged and posh and fun lives. And young people took to the streets, and then mobs turned into mobs, and they burnt the parliament. They dragged politicians and beat them on streets of all major political parties, not just the communists. And so something very interesting happened in Nepal. Remember that this very phenomenon, or a variant of this phenomenon, happened in Bangladesh a year ago. Remember that before that, 2 years ago, Pakistan erupted in protests and even sacked army generals' house, and mobs even sacked army generals' houses. Before that, mobs basically entered the presidential palace in Sri Lanka. And as we speak in India, in Ladakh, the extremely strategic Union territory of Ladakh, which is next to Tibet, and which is therefore a place which India sends a lot of troops to. There, mobs have burnt the ruling party, the Bharatiya Janata Party's office. Now, why? I mean, of course, there's some inequality there, there's economic pain there, but there's also this anger that there is no local democracy. Or similarly in Nepal, where there was democracy in form of elections, but it wasn't mature, there was this feeling that the politicians were unaccountable and uninterested in the public, and they were all interested in pilfering from the cookie jar. They were all stealing taxpayer money. And so what we are seeing in a lot of these poorer countries, and we can go further east to Indonesia, where earlier in the month, student protests erupted on the streets. There is this anger against a corrupt elite that is not answerable to the people, against democracies that don't work, against a distribution of income and wealth that is perceived to be unjust, and economies where you don't have jobs, where you have a lot of young people, and you have dashed expectations. The Ladakh example is important because Ladakh was always under the thumb of the Kashmiris, and the Ladakhis wanted their own state, and the BJP promised it to them. And so their expectations were raised and then dashed, the same as expectations were raised in Nepal by the communists, who were supposedly all for kumbaya and redistribution and equality and whatnot. And when their expectations were dashed, when their children, the children of the new elite, were behaving just like the children of the old elite, and the communist kids had turned into the new royals, that led to fury. And we are seeing that fury just as we saw that fury erupt in 1848. We are seeing that fury erupt around the world. Economic pain and political turmoil are very much going to dominate the headlines and developments in the weeks and months to come.
At some point, we have to find a happy subject, Atul.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Well, yeah.
Well, it's the wisdom of Voltaire, though. I mean, I can speak about my vegetable garden, and that's on the whole good news.
Yes, indeed. Il faut cultiver notre jardin.
C'est ça.
All right. Au revoir, everybody. See you next month.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.